All right, so you've got your Symphony Studio and IK Multimedia Immersive bundle. What's first? Well, the first thing we're gonna need to do is figure out our room, because when we're thinking about these speakers, they're gonna have to exist at different places. Now, it may seem like a lot if you're just getting into immersive audio, but luckily there are a ton of great resources that can help you. We'd recommend starting by reading Dolby Atmos's Music Production Best Practices Guide and taking a look at the Dolby Atmos Dart. That room design tool tends to be very helpful to help you understand what the dimensions of your room will mean in terms of the placement of your speakers. When it comes to actually putting things in place, there are a few things to observe with the angles of your speakers. You're going to want to make sure that they're able to face towards the same listening position, they're roughly symmetrical wherever possible, and that we're able to achieve the right standards set out by Dolby in that room design tool. Luckily, these speakers are very flexible. We see people set them up on top of things like mic stands in a pinch if you're unable to have a speaker stand in your space for your height speakers, for example. But there's lots of good ways of doing this. The real key thing is making sure that we have these relatively equidistant positions of our speakers where possible. Once we've got a good idea as to how we're going to position our speakers in our room, feel free to start getting your stuff into place. Wherever possible, marking positions tends to be very helpful, so that way if you need to move something out of position, you can put it right back to where it was. This way it doesn't affect any of the output correction features. Once you've got your speakers in position, hold off before connecting these XLRs into your output DB25s. The reason for doing this is to ensure that the correct speaker is connected to the right channel. As there are specific orders of how these cables are arranged, making sure we follow these conventions makes it a lot easier in our setup process and easier to reproduce. So before connecting your speakers, there's one other thing we need to think about, which is what audio goes where. If we've got 12 speakers, we need to make sure that what we intend is going to each of these channels. And oftentimes, this is something that actually can be different depending on which particular school of thought you ascribe to. But for the sake of making this easy on everyone, let's start you out with one of the most basic and most standard versions of this, which is going to be the SMPTE channel layout that is the default of your Symphony Studio. So here you're going to see left, right, center, LFE, and then on to the surround information here, starting with the middle sides, then the rears, and then the height information with left, right, front, and then left, right, rear as the final top information that's happening there. This particular layout works really easily because one of the common things that happens with immersive audio is you're not going to only be working in immersive audio. You'll also probably have times in your recording where you want to activate stereo or check how things work in 5.1. This kind of channel layout is really useful because it scales between all those things. All those channels build from the smallest system up to the biggest system. Makes things super easy to make sure that you can go between those formats seamlessly, which is our whole point of monitor workflows, is to make it so you don't have to use a monitor controller and can still access essential functions for doing immersive audio. Now, the other thing here we should think about is how we're going to get our DAW to talk to the Symphony Studio correctly. Because one of the things you might find is if you start out with, let's say, a default setting inside of your DAW, it's very possible you might not have it showing the same output assignments as I'm seeing here currently. In fact, if you go to the default layouts, you'll notice that they're switched around a little bit in Logic. And this is one of the steps you can do that just really makes sure that things go easily for yourself. You want to make sure that the preferences inside of your DAW and what's happening in monitor workflows are talking to each other. So that way we make sure that if I've got output 1 set to going to my left speaker, that Logic also sees that same information. So all we do here is we make sure that as we go down this list, those outputs align to what I'm hooking up as my outputs inside of my DAW. With just a little bit of extra work here, this makes it so that everything is going to act the way we expect, and as we play back audio, it is coming out of the speaker that we hope it to. It's going to make things so much easier. Once we have our DAW set to see those outputs assigned, and we have our Symphony Studio set up with that same output format, then we can just go about taking our DB25 from the back of the unit and cabling them up to our speakers. Now, if this is your first time using a DB25, Really all of this is a multi-connection line level cable. That's all it is. It's 8 connections jammed into one cable that can very efficiently fit on the back of this unit. But when we think about which channel goes where, this stuff matters. So in the Symphony Studio, you've got this stuff laid out with the official SMPTE Dolby Atmos layout. You'll notice a small label on each of these channels going from 1 to 8. Either way, the key thing is knowing which channel is which in your setup. So we want to make sure that not only do we know which channel we are connecting to, but it's also a good idea to have a label on there telling you what that channel is connecting to in your Symphony Studio. So one of our last steps here, now that we've got everything connected from our interface into our speakers, is to get the actual frequency response calibrated. While there's a ton of important tools that you can use inside of Symphony Studio to do this with any speakers, these iLouds have a parlor trick that we really love, which is self-calibration. So they'll come included with this microphone that can be hooked up and calibrate any of these particular speakers directly into it. Along with me, I also have a microphone stand to make this process easier. However, this can be totally done hand holding if you're able to keep a steady hand while you're working on it. So first things first, we're gonna hook up our XLR side into our microphone, and then this little 1/8 inch cable is gonna go into the back of that iLoud speaker. And then in order to get this to calibrate itself, we're gonna go into our back buttons here. You're gonna see a bunch of lights over there. We're gonna find a button that says Cal. We're gonna go and press and hold this button until we start to see it change. All the other lights go off, and then on the front side, we'll know we've entered into our calibration mode because of the blinking light that shows on the front side of the speaker. Once we've got this hooked up and we're ready to go, we're gonna go over, press that calibration button on the back, wait a few seconds, and it'll start making sweeps and boops and bops, and that's gonna get us the sound we need to correct each of these speakers for the space we're within. And check it out, we got green there, which means that it was able to accept that measurement. And as we look at the back of our speaker again, our front light is back to normal and our back lights are showing normal as well. Once that process is done, they've already corrected themselves for the space they sit within. And we love it because for a lot of users that are getting into immersive audio, this is going to provide one of the easiest setups to make sure that you can not only fit these speakers easily inside of the space you have to work with, but can get them up and running and sounding good in no time.